We've just seen the end of this year's summer blockbuster movie season, such as it was. Most of the drama we saw was about the movies rather than in the movies themselves. And fans often debate whether stories should be lighter, focusing on fun with simple virtues, as opposed to heavier stories that focus on serious ideas. Right now, it seems like Team Fun is winning over Team Serious, but also nobody is really winning at the box office. How can Christian fans engage stories that are light versus heavy?
Speculative fiction, like no other genre, reflects the creativity of God.
If you look at the scriptures, you're going to have to see that God uses imagination more than rational discourse.
We are supposed to be image bearers for a vastly creative God.
Reading fantastical fiction opened a portal in my imagination for a place other than just a materialistic world.
I experienced the gospel story with the mind of someone who loved adventure and loved the idea of light conquering darkness.
We're wired for stories that reflect how we see the world in ways that are true.
The story is either pointing to Christ or it's pointing to our need for Christ.
Disregard your burdens and acquire Fantastical Truth, the podcast from Lorehaven.com, whose mission is to explore fantastical stories for God's glory. I'm me, Stephen Burnett, the publisher of Lorehaven, also the author of a sci-fi novel launched earlier this year called Above the Circle of Earth.
And I'm Zackary Russell, and I prefer my coffee medium roast. And this is episode 275. Why do fans debate light stories versus heavy stories?
Now, that's an interesting comparison, Zach. And I like your comparison there between the roast styles. It's not so much we're talking about light versus dark roasts. We're not talking about light stories versus dark stories, but light stories versus heavy stories. It's not the tone of the story necessarily, but the weight of it. Some readers like a lighter story. Maybe they feel like they've got enough burdens as it is, and they like a story that helps relieve those burdens. And then others would like a story that kind of reflects the burdens they've been carrying, or what they see when they look at the news or read some heavier nonfiction. I myself go both ways. Maybe you feel the same way, faithful listener. Either way, I look forward to this discussion.
Yeah, I've mentioned in the podcast many times that I can fall asleep to a war movie or to an action movie, or even just to podcast news and all the crazy things happening in the world. My wife and my kids kind of make fun of me about that, but I don't know. There's just something about listening to a story that's about a much heavier topic than my own life, and I just kind of feel relaxed. I'm like, man, my life is pretty good.
Now that's interesting too. The idea of a story that is heavier than your life, which makes your burden feel lighter by comparison. Come to think of it, I actually enjoy stories for similar reasons too. I look forward to doing a comparing contrast for this episode. It's something that I think it's been in the back of a lot of our discussions on this podcast, but has definitely come to the fore because of the recent summer blockbuster-ish season. We'll talk about that in a moment. First, however, we have articles at Lorehaven sometimes about movies, and we call those Lorehaven On Screen. And the most recent one that we published was an article from Marion A. Jacobs. It was actually republished from her Substack. This is an article about the smash hit that for some reason wasn't in theaters, but probably should have been, but didn't apparently need to be to win Netflix, basically. K-pop Demon Hunters, a silly movie about serious subjects. And Marion breaks that down very well. And also talks about how catchy the songs are. So there is a movie we'll talk about a little bit later in this episode too, which is kind of at once both light and heavy in its subject matter. We also have new reviews every Friday of the best Christian-made fantastical novels like Unfixed by Amy L. Sauter and Illuminary by Shauna Schroeder. That last one's coming up this Friday after release date. If you don't want to watch a website all the time, subscribe free and we will email you updates to Lorehaven's many offerings. Subscribe free at Lorehaven.com. We'll also send you the secret code to join the Lorehaven Guild, our Discord server, where we do monthly book quests. Right now, we are questing through The Time Door by Shannon McDermott. By the way, we also have sponsors on this show, and the top sponsor is Enclave Publishing with a new novel by Morgan L. Bussey called Winter's Chill. This is book 2 in the Nordic Wars series by Inspi Sela and Carol Award-winning author Morgan Bussey. Fighter, emissary, long-lost daughter. Brigid has one mission as she returns to the north, to warn her people of the oath that binds them. But the mountains are treacherous and snow comes early, leaving her on death's doorstep until she has an unexpected encounter that not only reveals a secret about her past, but also brings new allies into her life. Meanwhile, the healer Caden must come to terms with the awakening of his Eldaron power. With winter approaching and the war on hold, he ventures to the White City to uncover his heritage. As he walks the ancient halls of his people's birthplace, he discovers not all adversaries are across the battle line. He must navigate political opponents while searching for a way to stop those of his kind who have turned to the darkness. Yet even the bitterness of winter cannot keep Brigid and Caden apart. A connection has been forged between them, and their bond might be the one thing that could save the Nordic people and end the war. Enclave Publishing presents Winter's Chill, Book 2 in the Nordic Wars series by Insby Sela and Carol Award-winning author Morgan Bussey. It is available now wherever fantastic books are sold. Ask for Winter's Chill at your favorite bookseller or your local library, or order it online at Amazon or at enclavepublishingstore.com. It's also available as an audiobook from Oasis Audio, and you can see that cool cover, that chilly cover, in the show notes for this episode 275. Zach, that sounded like a heavy story to me. A lot of emphasis there on the political entanglements and unexpected encounters and secrets and darkness and bitterness and all that stuff. That kind of scratches my itch for a story that engages with the more serious side of life. Let's talk about many fans favoring the light and fun stories with color, stories with some simpler ideas, maybe more popular morals, lots of jokes, and definitely more of a palette that, at least on the surface, would seem to appeal to more people. However, I'm not talking about flippant or crude stories, although sometimes stories that are described as light, fun, comedic, action comedy, those can lead in that direction, but I'm trying to give the best possible version of the light, fun, colorful story that a lot of people like. These stories, I've noticed, especially in the movie versions, tend to embrace or lampshade long familiar tropes with the genre. And I see this too often on the internet. And Zach, I want to pause here and ask you about this. Do you see a lot of people talking about these stories more so than the heavier ones, or does the discourse seem to favor either one, heavier or light stories?
I guess it kind of depends on phase of life. I mean, I've got young kids and I've got teenagers. So with our younger kids, they love Paw Patrol. We all love Despicable Me and Emperor's New Groove and just kind of silly comedy that you can just enjoy and you don't get too scared by or anything like that. I have a guilty pleasure in this category, which is candid camera type videos or TV shows. I feel like an awful person for laughing at other people's misfortune for laughs, but usually it's harmless pranks. And I think our favorite one as a family is there's some bodybuilder guy and he's at the beach and he goes over to the showers. It's kind of this open shower area, and there's this little guy over top the wall squirting shampoo on his head as he's trying to wash all the sand off. And he's like, "Where's all the shampoo coming from? Shampoo!" And he's getting so angry. And then he finally notices the guy, and so he chases him around the beach, and it's just hilarious. All of those kind of prank videos, I love them. I don't like the mean pranks, of course, the like making people afraid they're going to die or get robbed or some kind of actual crime is happening, which that's a whole other category. But I like all these things, but man, I mean, I grew up watching like G.I. Joe and Transformers and Dungeons and Dragons, and that had quite a bit of bad guys in it. So I don't even know if that would be light and colorful. Maybe we'll talk about those later, but we should talk about the summer blockbusters that were kind of more in this category and how those did or didn't do.
Yes. Now, understand that when I say light and colorful, I'm not just talking about kids' cartoons, because there are PG-13 movies that will tend to follow this aesthetic as well. And one of those, of course, was the recent Superman movie, which I understand, at least in the Russell household, met with some mixed response. And I haven't seen it. I'm not going to see it because I do not like the director and I do not like what he's doing. I hope that he's doing it for good reasons, but I don't know for sure. That whole corporation is just completely messed up. So I have a principled decision to avoid the nonsense. But even if everything that I wanted to see happen had happened from that studio, this would not be a movie that interested me in the slightest. But Zach, it's a little bit of a different case for you guys.
It just hit me that the new Superman is essentially the Blues Traveler song where where it doesn't matter what I say as long as I sing it with inflection. And that was very much the style of this James Gunn movie, where plenty of style, plenty of great cinematography, amazing choreography of the action scenes, but kind of empty at times. And so we walked out of the theater, my middle daughter and I, and she said, "What did you think, Dad?" And I could see this big smile on her face, and I said, "What did you think?" And she said, "I really liked it." And I just said, "Good."
You had to do one of those dad moments.
She saw right through me, and she's like, "You didn't like it?" I'm like, "No, but I'm glad you did."
So Zach, why didn't you like it?
Oh man, it's hard to explain, but I literally just was cringing in every scene of that movie.
Wow.
It's like nothing felt right. Like it like overall kind of worked, but in every scene I'm like, why is this person doing this thing, and what is going on, and why is Superman talking to Lois when there's this big battle happening outside, and he just says, "Oh, they got it." And like it just seemed kind of I don't even know. It's not the like deconstruction type story of like, say, The Boys. It's more of like it just didn't make any sense. I've been reading this book lately, Stephen, about writing in the age of ChatGPT. And the author makes a really good point that a lot of AI generative tools, they produce perfect syntax, grammar, spelling, but it's still kind of like nonsense when you read it. For example, I asked some AI tool the other day for a very specific example of like a type of crime I wanted to learn about for research. It actually gave me one very specific example. In fact, it was one that I knew about. So it was a good like test of it. But then the very next example was like a really generic story that had no when, where, who, what, why, but it like it almost seemed true. And that's kind of how I felt about Superman. It's like, well, you had someone named Superman and you had someone named Lex Luthor, and they're fighting, and there's someone named Lois Lane who's the love interest, but none of it made any sense to me.
Interesting. Now, I'll talk about in the next chapter, which is a more of a comparison to a more serious take on Superman or superheroes. But that was the vibe that I got from the advertising for this one. And confession here, I didn't necessarily go looking for the advertising for this movie because, as I said, I'm disinterested on principle. But it found me, and I was similarly turned off. But what's interesting is that a lot of people really like the vibes of this movie, not even necessarily the plot or all of those things. They're not making comments necessarily about the cinematography and such, one way or the other. It seems to be very much a movie about the vibes, which is kindness and some simpler morals and things like that. And I might have an objection to that. Again, not just on aesthetics, but on morality, but I'll save that for the next chapter. But saying it more positively here, it does seem a lot of people liked this, excluding you and me. We are obviously not in the audience for this. So I do want to issue a quick disclaimer. That gives the lie to the idea that any more of these days, a movie can be for everybody. I think someone wants to have like that 4-quadrant franchise that's just going to bring in everybody. Everyone's going to align with the vision of the directors and the corporation and the actors. And I even saw about this movie. Oh, this is Superman for everybody. No, it's not. It absolutely is not. It's not for me. It's not for a lot of fans of other takes on Superman, whether Reeve in 78 or Man of Steel in 2013. But to be fair, I liked the Fantastic Four movie, Fantastic Four First Steps, Pascal notwithstanding. You kind of forget it's him. And the movie is very well put together. It's got some extremely cool moments and a lot of thoughtful morality about families and sacrifice, and even the role of extended family in the raising of a child. And all of that stuff sounds kind of highfalutin to say, but it's illustrated in this wonderful retro-futuristic 60s world with some actual threat happening. And there's no stupid dialogue like, you need to come see this, or he's right behind me, isn't he? Or any of the dumb little cliched, the quippy dialogue that some people think every light story is like, but no, it doesn't necessarily have to be that way. Nonetheless, Fantastic Four is also struggling, which leads it back to my question of, do people talk maybe about these stories and like the vibes about them so much that they don't actually have a lot of staying power? It's what I've described before as more of a fast fashion. And so that may be a risk of light, colorful stories, is that neither one of these films did better, for example, than most DC or Marvel films in the 2010s. It seems that once the lockdowns hit, it kind of broke the spell, except for a couple movies afterwards, so it can't explain everything. And yet it does seem that despite this, more of the big franchises are choosing this creative direction. And they seem to think that it's still worth it to go in this lighter direction, although Fantastic Four was a little bit heavier. And I think actually the numbers show that Fantastic Four wasn't doing as well as the other guy. Nonetheless, definitely the direction is more in the lighter direction. And that's where critics like me, who, or you maybe, who are going like, this doesn't make any sense. What's happening? We're subverting a trope in order, for the lulz, not necessarily being flippant, but we're just having fun with the trope because it's going to get a laugh at the expense of plot or character or realism. Well, guys like us may need to remember that also in the real world, people like these kinds of stories. So if we're gonna, our own argument backfires on us, right? Like, well, that's not realistic. That doesn't ring true to reality. Well, also in reality, people like these kinds of movies. Not enough to make them break even at the box office, by the way. Superman did not even break even, so I don't even know why they're promoting the guys. They're failing upward again, but it's still a fact that we have to reckon with as our realistic selves, that these fans, I think, and I want to respect them, by the way, and sometimes I come across as if I don't, but I think that a lot of people like these movies because they like simple reminders about simple ideas and good vibes, that it is kind of an escapism, but I can't blame that necessarily, because when real life is a struggle and there's a lot of bad news and seeming celebration of unkindness and things like that, I guess it's nice just to go to a movie and see a simpler hero on screen talking about how kind he is. I don't necessarily get it. I think that is corny in a bad way. I have some objections. I'll save those for the next one. But it really comes down to an observation you made, Zach, actually. I want to get your take on this, is that contrast between people preferring what I would call inspirational heroes. Oh, he's like me. He's like someone I know, or could be like someone I know. Versus an aspirational hero. Well, here's a kind of out of reach ideal, but someone I really would like to be like, a distant but good hero that I will never live up to, but it's worth trying to live up to.
Yeah, and I think a lot of Christian fiction, like movies, fall into this category. A lot of the Sherwood Pictures types films, the pure flicks, maybe a lot of the Hallmark kind of fiction. But going back to my love for slapstick type humor, I think a lot of that falls here too. It's like no one really gets hurt. It's just kind of funny. Another big movie though in that category that dropped this summer is Liam Neeson starring in The Naked Gun. And it's obviously a reboot of that franchise from the 80s that starred Leslie Nielsen. And it was really interesting to read some of the comments about that. I haven't seen it. I've seen all the original ones.
I don't think we can see it as Christians. I thought the advertising was hilarious though for it. And Neeson himself is a hilarious actor. He's funny.
Well, and that's actually what I wanted to focus on. He doesn't do comedies, right? He's the action hero, I will find you,
Well, he actually went from like the spiritual mystic hero to action hero, partly because of the Phantom Menace. And then he was the villain in Batman Begins. And then, after that, he kind of turned into the action hero, which is a career turn. I don't think even he's all coming.
Right. So he's been the heavy, serious guy for a long time. And so there was a lot of commentary about this. Like, why did they choose Liam Neeson for this? Like, he's not a comedy actor, but the entire point of Naked Gun is sort of this deadpan humor. And actually, that's what a lot of people, and I didn't realize this, a lot of people said the same thing about Leslie Nielsen, that he was not a slapstick comedy guy before that movie.
No, he was the hero in Forbidden Planet. in when was it, the 50s or 60s. He was like a straight man type space captain hero, and then because of that series or something else, he turned into this straight man in a comedy world role.
Right, and it really works because that's that style of humor, right? It's sort of the a lot of British humor is that way, right? And so just very dry humor, along with a lot of the slapstick kind of stuff. So that film is doing really well from everything I hear. I don't know if I'll see it, but I wondered if like in this same category is like the Bill Murray, little darker comedy kind of stuff. Like I mentioned Groundhog Day or Scrooge or really Ghostbusters, any other type of film that he's in. There's always kind of an edge to those movies. So that might go into more of category 3, but there is still a lot of just PG comedies that I think. Then again, a lot of 80s and 90s PG or probably PG-13 today. But yeah, we're not talking about necessarily the R-rated comedies here, but just the kind of fun, and you don't have to think about it too much. But I'll tell you something else that kind of fits in this category is there's a lot of big dumb action movies that fit here, like Pacific Rim. I love that movie. I went to see that with my cousin who was like, I think 12 or 13 at the time. And he was just on the edge of his seat. It's like, oh yeah, that robot got out a sword and like knocked that kaiju, and, just amazing moments. But it ultimately, it wasn't very serious. It didn't take itself too seriously. And I think there's always a place for that. My boss, he loves I think it's called the Meg, about the megalodon shark, and it's sort of like the supersized version of Jaws, prehistoric, and they're chasing it down, but it's eating everyone, but they blow it up, or I don't even know. I haven't seen it. And he's like, sometimes you just have to turn your brain off and enjoy a fun story.
I get that. And I am like that when I am watching Instagram videos with my wife or finding fun memes on X. And yet when I go to a movie or sit down to watch a TV show or even play a game, I am in the mood for something more substantive. I feel like I've already gotten my comedy bits and my fun, colorful itch scratched on the social media. And it seems almost gluttonous to then want to go to a movie and expect more of the same for 2 hours. I get it though, for something like a comedy, which is based in the narrative and spoofing of human nature and stuff. Zach, I got to ask before we move on to the more serious side here. Did you laugh at all during the Superman movie? Were parts of it at least funny, like deconstructively funny, or constructively funny, or funny at all? I almost feel like an anthropologist here.
Yeah, that's what was really curious to me, actually. There were moments where I unintentionally laughed, or it's like I laughed even though I don't think it was supposed to be a funny moment. It was just like I said, I'm kind of cringing. It's like an awkward laugh, like, this is funny, but kind of weird. Probably the best moments were with just went blank, but the super dog that's like this crazy, rambunctious, but super powered dog. But a lot of the jokes they just kind of overdid, and maybe that was part of the problem. Once or twice I genuinely laughed, but it just wasn't the vibe for me. Again, my daughter loved it. She's been watching the Arrowverse and a lot of those shows, and she's like, not everything has to be so dark. It can just be funny. It can be bright and kind of easygoing. And I'm like, okay. I mean, that's how a lot of comic books are. They're a lot of comic books don't get too serious.
Yes, but some do. And generally we call them graphic novels. And I think that's maybe the difference between expectations for superhero movies. A lot of people now have kind of caught the phrase, it needs to be like the comics. And sometimes what they mean by that is it needs to be like what I think comics are like. And yet some comics continuities are more on that mixed light and heavy side of things. And a lot of graphic novels, especially in the 80s and 90s, were much heavier in their subject matter. So some of that is just kind of the more popular level understanding, the same understanding that says that Captain Kirk was always kissing the green girls and always saying, beam me up, Scotty. Well, the actual Captain Kirk as a character is more complex than that. Yes, even the goofy William Shatner version actually had some very heavy moments, and yet people kind of forget that and they go for the vibes as repeated through popular culture. Another example of maybe heavy giving way to light is the American Godzilla movies, which is a franchise I started out very interested in, and now I've completely lost interest. Now they've actually turned it from the more serious Godzilla 2014, directed by Gareth Edwards, and then even Godzilla King of the Monsters a few years later. I think King of the Monsters hit kind of that third category of light and heavy at the same time. The first movie was just almost entirely heavy all throughout, and I like both of those. But then they moved King Kong into it, and they just decided these are going to be completely light, fast fashion, ultimately forgettable smash 'em ups. And now the only thing really that survives from that Godzilla versus Kong movie is the meme of Godzilla or Kong punching Godzilla on top of a battleship for some reason. And even that one doesn't seem to be as popular as the meme of Ghidorah, the three monster heads, with the third one being Goofy, that spreads around. Interestingly, and we talked about this in our memes episode, I forget which number that is. Interestingly, it seems that the heavier, more serious stories generate more memes than the comedic, lighter ones that are trying already to be a meme. And maybe it's because what's there to meme? They've already memed themselves. They were trying to be a 2-hour meme. They left nothing for the folks on the internet. So it seems to be that, I mean, you'll see a lot more Dune memes probably than you will Naked Gun memes, because Dune is serious and Naked Gun is not. And part of the fun of making something into a meme is taking what was serious and then finding the funny side of it. It's fascinating to see that people seem to want these kinds of stories, and they say, well, it doesn't have to be dark all the time, but very few superhero movies now are dark all the time. That is a lingering myth. I don't think we've had a dark superhero movie since Matt Reeves is the Batman. And everything else after that has been action comedy all the time, which is one reason why I liked Fantastic Four. And I wish that Disney hadn't tanked their brand so badly. More folks need to see that. It's genuinely a good movie. Well, let's go to chapter 2, but first our sponsor 2, which is Dan Megill with a novel called The Waymaker's Foresight, which might be light, might be heavy. I'm not sure. I'll read this. You decide. Gavin and Nax are smugglers struggling to find work on a backwater space station. So when Lila, a highborn lady, hires them for a short jaunt to the nearest wormhole, they don't ask many questions. But Lila is fleeing the galaxy's mightiest empire, carrying knowledge of lost technologies that could reshape the stars. Now, this unlikely trio must learn to work together as they race between star systems and unravel forgotten mysteries while staying one step ahead of the Imperial fleets and a ruthless prince. The Waymaker's Foresight is a new science fiction adventure by Dan Megill, author of the acclaimed Earthburst trilogy. You can find The Waymaker's Foresight on Amazon and Audible, or visit Megill.com to learn more. That is MEGILL.com to explore more about The Waymaker's Foresight. Links in that cool sci-fi cover found in the show notes for this episode. Chapter 2, other fans enjoy heavier or more serious stories. And that leads me to a late concession here. Because of the basically corporate abortion of more heavy or more serious superhero movies, like those directed by Zack Snyder and others, I tend to lobby very hard for a restoration of these kinds of stories. And that's because this side is the underdog right now, or at least perceived to be so at the box office. There's a few directors who can still get away with a heavier story, usually in a science fiction genre. But in this case, all of the attention seems to be on that line, Zach, that you mentioned earlier. Well, things don't have to be dark all the time. They can also be just light and fun. To which I respond, yeah, and also things don't have to be light and fun all the time either. They can also be heavy and serious and challenging. And that's what I mean when I say heavier stories or serious stories. I mean a challenging and more realistic tale, even if it's about an alien in a red cape with superpowers. What I do not mean here is a nihilistic or deconstructive story. Although some stories that people think are heavy and serious do tend to be this deconstructive. And I don't like those. I think there can be a kind of story that challenges a tradition, but then ultimately reaffirms it. And by the way, that's actually the more positive version of the word trope. The more positive version is just tradition. And a lot of these more serious stories embrace tradition with a complete clear eyes. For example, Fantastic Four did that. I don't recall any moment in Fantastic Four where they turned to wink to the critic out there or the audience out there to say, hey, we're all just having fun here, guys. This is just a movie. One of my favorite moments, it looks like a light story, Fantastic Four, right? And it's certainly not, Matt Reeves, the Batman, with its dark palette and, noir and all of that. But what I mean is it's a heavy story with some serious ideas in there. And one of my favorite moments is in a total celebration montage at the beginning, very quickly recapping the origin of this Fantastic Four. And there's a narrator of like this 1960s talk show who's recounting their origin along with clips. And he says, these four friends, this married couple, and then her brother, and then his best friend, they all go up as astronauts. And then the TV show host guy, Mark Gatiss is the actor. He actually pauses and he says with his breathless awe, and they came back with superpowers. I saw that clip and I just loved that moment. There was no winking. There was no deconstruction at all. It was just awe. And then you see something cool happen on screen, and then the Michael Giacchino score raises into this heroic fanfare. And suddenly you're just along for the ride. You're having fun, but it's also taking itself seriously. It's embracing the tradition of the origin story without belaboring the origin story. And by the way, these stories often, at least in the past, find praise and criticism by fans and critics. So they will sometimes prove polarizing. A lot of people love them and a lot of people don't love them, but either way, they get talked about and they set records. For example, Zach, you finally got me to watch the Andor series, despite my loathing of the Star Wars brand, now being repaired, by the way, thanks to the Disney settlement with Gina Carano. Brief pause for a round of applause. That was amazing to see that. We'll talk more about that later, maybe. But you got me to watch the Andor series. I caught up to season 1 just in time for season 2. Loved it. That was definitely on the heavier side. Like there are some cute little droids wheeling about, saying some silly things, but that was a serious story. And then my wife and I rewatched Rogue One, and it was a little bit more of that light and heavy all at the same time. But also a lot of fans liked the more serious Marvel movies. Marvel often gets dismissed as being only light and fun action comedy. Well, no, there were some serious ones like Captain America, the Winter Soldier, or Avengers Infinity War. Like those are some of the absolute best Marvel stories. And then, of course, there's my favorite, the heavier DC stories.
I think what works with these stories that are heavier is that they have real bad guys, that
absolutely
that actually, accomplish their bad guy goals, and they beat the heroes at times.
There are consequences.
And because that is real life. Like in real life, the bad guys get away with it sometimes. Not ultimately, but a lot of us are probably in the middle of a story where the bad guys are getting away with it. I mean, I was just reading a story about some terrible crimes happening in the UK against children that we won't talk about, but the police seem completely uninterested in prosecuting the bad guys. It's a type of favoritism that they have towards that demographic of bad guy. And you can look through any period in history, and this has happened. There's been weak leaders that let bad men do whatever they want. And so the average person feels very unprotected. They feel very unsafe, and the world seems very dangerous. And so, of course, we want these superhero movies where Bruce Wayne is like, I'm going to get all the cool high-tech gadgets from Wayne Enterprises and just put them on all at once and just go take care of business, because apparently no one else is going to. And that's why I love the Dark Knight trilogy from Christopher Nolan, because it's like one guy's quest to right all the wrongs, whatever it takes. And that's kind of the other side to this, is that these heavier movies resonate because sometimes life is very messy when it comes to doing the right thing, and you're out on your own. There's no one to look up to, and you've just got to fight hard. And it might be a dirty fight, and you might not be proud of yourself. And you might just be really scared going up against the bad guys. And so, I love these kind of stories because they definitely resonate with a lot of the experiences I've had in my life.
Well, it sounds to me that that may be one reason you didn't love the new hero movie as much, because by all accounts that I'd read, the stakes seemed to be fairly low. That did not seem to be set. I mean, it's got to judge the story on its own terms, but that seems to have been the idea: is previous stories were too heavy and the stakes were too high, and the ideas were too challenging. We're going to dial it back. We're going to give people a little bit more of a 101 level introduction to the character and the morality. We're going to nerf the world a little bit so that even a PR campaign against Superman is ultimately not going to work. Whereas in the Snyderverse, for example, people, as one of our reviewers, Speculative Faith, once said, the regular people in the world, they don't hit their marks for the superhero movie. They don't all automatically rally around to support Superman. Some of them are against him. Some of them are complete swooning fanboys and fangirls, and there are other people who are much more interested in the politics around him. And that's the rules of the story, to be heavier, to explore what would it actually be like if a superhero with these powers came to something like our real world.
Yeah, you really hit on it there, and I'm going to give a little bit of spoilers here. I'll try to keep it as light as possible, so you can skip this if you want to go see the new Superman. But in the new Superman, okay, the way that they have to defeat the evil is with a news article, like an op-ed piece, and it's this whole PR battle, like you said, and it all comes down to a speech that he has to give at the end. Versus in Man of Steel, you've got General Zod, this military conqueror, using a terraforming machine to completely obliterate the ecosphere of planet Earth and shooting laser eyes at these civilians. And Superman's got to punch a bunch of stuff, right? Like he's got to fly. I mean, first of all, there's the dilemma of like, where do you go first? Like, what do you fight against? And he's fighting a whole army of people like General Zod. And General Zod almost like convinces him or convinces you that he is right, because he says, look, I was made for this. I was born for this. This is my purpose, to spread, Kryptonian civilization everywhere.
High stakes.
So how do you argue against that? That's like how he was genetically programmed by their entire species to do this. And Superman is one of them, right? So that movie was so good for all of those reasons. The new one, it's like people that are so addicted to social media that they think social media is real life. All conflict just boils down to if you've got a hot take, or you can, cancel someone, or you get enough likes and you can ratio them, or you just have a quippy, meme or something. And it's like, that is not real life. Like real life involves some very tough battles, and it might be in the more verbal, mental, psychological, political space, but a lot of real life is like, it's a slugfest. It's not, who's going to have the best PR piece.
Well, bringing in a biblical worldview as well, the victory is certainly, you said this a moment ago, Zach, victory is certainly assured at the end. Christ returns, he defeats his enemies, he banishes them to hell, and he remakes the world. So we're not arguing here for a heavy story that shows that there is no victory and the good guys always lose or almost always lose or any of that. No, I want a story with a happy ending. Absolutely here. I don't want some subversive thing. What I dislike is a story that compromises the happy ending because it was too easy. The stakes were so low that the hero can therefore win so much more easily, almost by default. The bad guys are incompetent. You can win the day with a happy speech about how human you are, or simple kindness, and that really is what comes down to with the morality of a story like this one, Zach. The discussion I heard about the movie, if it wasn't from fans who are basically just gloating because, haha, we got our movie and the other guys whom we view as our competition did not, well, that's kind of rude. That's not very kindness. But the more positive construction is, I heard a lot of talk about, it's just nice to see a movie where there's just a very kind, just a very sweet-natured hero who wants to save even the squirrels. And I think Well, apart from all discussion about whether or not that's realistic, Zach, I think your comparison earlier to PureFlix movies was exactly on point. Which reminds me though, I want to be kind and Christ-like to my believers, my fellow brothers and sisters in Christ who like Christian social drama movies with simple morals. Now, there may be some actual worldview problems with a story that implies, well, if you accept Jesus, then your little boy comes back from heaven and your marriage is put back together and everything turns happy. Well, that's actually false teaching through story, so I would oppose that. But if it's just a simpler story where the husband decides to recommit and get rid of his porn or something, and then at the end he's kissing his wife in the firehouse, well, I'm okay with that because I know that stuff does happen. But the problem occurs when people expect all stories and all reality to be like these simpler social dramas. And also, I wonder, are all the superhero movies now going to go in that direction? Except with like this James Gunn edge where you're showing up for flippant jokes as well as this best impression of simple morals. I don't know if I favor a superhero movie that's just about simple morals. I can get that from a PureFlix movie. What I want to see from a big budget movie is big ideas as well as some big action scenes. So at the very least, those stories are not for me. And apparently the corporations have decided that's the only kind of stories they're going to do now, because I don't see any heavier big budget superhero movies on the horizon at all. And even Fantastic Four getting a little close to it apparently didn't do as well. So you and I, brother, we are now in the minority, and these heavier stories tend to be playing a little bit better on less expensive media like streaming and TV, where unfortunately they also throw in a lot of content that you and I would object to. I don't need to see naked people or sexual content along with my big ideas. Can you just keep the big ideas, please? Just keep the big ideas.
Yeah, I thought of another good comparison of the light and heavy. And it's funny because these came out the same year or a year apart in the 90s. It was the whole asteroid craze of movies. And there was one movie called Armageddon with Bruce Willis and Liv Tyler and whoever. And then there was
Ben
Deep
Affleck,
Impact. Yeah.
Who made fun of it later because he's cool.
Yeah. Armageddon was basically the music video for Aerosmith, just the extended music video for one of their songs, which I'm not going to try to sing. And it was just so silly at times, and it was obviously meant to be very lighthearted, even as it's about this asteroid about to destroy the Earth. But tons of also stock footage scenes that were weird. Deep Impact was much more serious, and it was much more
Deep Impact. I liked it.
Yeah. Oh man, I
Elijah
love
Wood's
movie.
in it too.
Yeah. And it was also like a little bit smaller scale. It was primarily about a couple of families and how this investigative reporter even uncovers this whole secret that the government knows about this asteroid, and they're preparing this underground, bunker, and there's a lottery system for it, and this family's trying to get to safety. Like, man, so many good moments in that. And I felt like it really respected the genre of like into the world asteroid kind of thing, while still being hopeful. And where I think a movie kind of crosses the line into more of like the dark, like the noble dark, or but like the grim dark territory, is when there's really no heroes. There's the challenge I mentioned earlier where there's really no bad guys and there's no real fight to beat the bad guys. But I think where these movies can maybe get too heavy for people is when there's not only no happy ending, but there's like no good guys. And there's no one to really root for. You just kind of don't like anyone. And, this would be honestly a lot of modern crime fiction. I tried to watch that Matthew McConaughey crime series. I'll think of the name in a minute. Movies like Seven with Brad Pitt, streaming series like Sons of Anarchy, some of a lot of horror, honestly, but a lot of the like the literary drama where it's just very postmodern. I should like cyberpunk stories. I do like a lot of them, but books like Neuromancer, movies like Blade Runner, there's just kind of no one to cheer for. And so it's heavy in a different way because you're never really getting relief for anything. And I would even put one of my favorite movies in this sort of too heavy category, which is 12 Monkeys, another Bruce Willis, Brad Pitt movie. There are some really good moments in that movie. It's a little depressing how it ends, but it's also very brilliant how it ends. But again, it's like, does anything change? Does anything change for the better, or does everything just change for the worse? And again, in life, there are a lot of situations that go from bad to worse, and they don't really get better. I like my dark roast coffee as well as my medium roast, but much less often.
I think that a story that is deconstructive like that, there are no heroes. Everyone does what is right in his own eyes. So just choose the one you think is going to win because you think they're going to win because power. I think those are just as unrealistic as the kind of light story that ultimately weakens the victory or weakens its morality because they're presenting the world so unrealistically. I do not believe in a world where there are no heroes because I see real heroes in this world because of common grace and because of Christ's saving grace. And that's what I'm looking for in a story, whether it's light or it's heavy. And that's what I enjoy about the best kinds of superhero stories, because the best ones, at least, they are not just showing this happy, shallow movie land where if you are just easily kind and you actually care for all the woodland creatures, then everything will ultimately go right for you. I don't believe that. And I think that is what I would remind critics of the heavier stories, just as I reminded myself about the lighter stories, is that in the real world, people like them. I would remind critics of the heavier stories that life, like Zach was saying, isn't like a shallow movie land. You can't point to that movie and see, wouldn't the world just be better if we all were kinder to each other? Well, that is a kind of live, laugh, love, sappy, sentimental, fake morality that no, it does not work anywhere outside of the sealed environment of the happy movie land. I would say the same thing, especially more cynical side about certain evangelical social drama movies. And I would say the same thing about other lighter movies that go maybe a little bit too far, especially when their fans defend them as if they're actually more realistic. Fans of the heavier stories, we like complex reflections of challenging ideas. We like reflections of real life being a struggle. And we like the idea of high stakes so that the victory is so much more satisfying. The hero sacrificed his life and then somehow managed to come back. The supporting team overcame overwhelming odds in order to secure the victory just by the skin of their teeth. That feels a lot closer to reality. That to me is much more aspirational and inspirational, but also it is genuinely comforting to see people fight through these overwhelming odds. You make the odds less overwhelming, and then the victory is just not as satisfying. So if I had to pick between lighter stories and heavier ones, I would choose the heavier ones, but we still have a third category to summarize coming up after sponsor 3, which is my novel Above the Circle of Earth. I've talked about it a lot on this show. It's about Brock and Alicia Rivers, exiled to Mars, and now they're coming back to start the space mission above the Circle of Earth to resist the one world humanistic cause. This is a story I hope fits into the third category we'll talk about in a moment. There are certainly some light moments, but it's also a fairly heavy world that Brock and Alicia need to confront of the next century. By the way, as we record, Above the Circle of Earth and a lot of Enclave hardcovers are still on super sale at Amazon. Ace is actually 70% off, so we'll include that link in the show notes. Go get it. Even if you already have it, go get a gift copy for a friend who likes science fiction and some deeper ideas, and see what they think. It's like a sci-fi action thriller meets the Book of Acts, Above the Circle of Earth. Chapter 3. And I think this one actually is the winner, Zach. Over the light stories and over the heavier stories, more fans, it seems, are embracing stories that are both light and heavy. And a lot of franchises insist on both approaches at once. They're doing one moment light, comedic, whimsical, and then another moment dark, challenging, and heavy. And I could do a whole episode about a recent plot line in Ichiro Oda's manga first, then anime One Piece. And there's a recent plot, and this is set in a completely fantasy world where there's a navy with heroes and villains and pirates who are heroes and villains and a lot of islands and continents and kingdoms and bystanders. But the whole series ground to a halt from its main pirate crew, and then took time out to tell the story of a side character named Bartholomew Kuma, who showed up out of the blue one day to do something that seems terrible to our characters. And then fans notice, why is he carrying a Bible? Why does he have this book that says Bible on it in English? What's going on there? Well, little bit of spoilers here. They flash back to his backstory. It turns out that he, in this world's equivalent religion, is a pastor. At least that's what they call him in the English translation, who is like super powered. He's like from a lost race of people who have some gifts or something that we don't know about. He's unnaturally large. And then he actually adopts this little girl who has a disease. And in order to get special care for her disease, he turns himself into the Navy and gets turned into a cyborg whose entire sense of free will is going to be removed, which is like super, super dark. And his whole story is like he's been suffering, and he has a special gift of actually absorbing pain and turning it into force that he can use against his enemies. But he like can absorb pain, and he's just suffering this whole time. But then he's got this goofy smile on his face, and then he's laughing and having these whimsical moments the other moment. And it's just all at once whimsical and light, and also dark and heavy and tragic. But by the end, this guy is just an absolute hero. And fans are absolutely loving this. And of course, here I am as a Christian going, wow, you guys are celebrating a fantasy pastor in this crazy anime manga pirate world, showing these Christ-like virtues and then blending all at once these light and heavy story elements, which, by the way, One Piece and a lot of anime has been doing all along. And then so has this smash hit we talked about at the top of the show, K-pop Demon Hunters. It starts off light, it starts off zany, and it still maintains that throughout. And then once it kind of settles in, you realize, oh, there's some really serious ideas here. Like the idea of having this dark secret is actually very bad, and demons are bad, and they need to go down. And how are we going to defeat them? And it's great stuff. Which, Zach, if you haven't finished it, I'm not going to spoil it for you.
Yeah, I started watching and I'm like, what even is this? I
hope you had kids in the room with you, because you need to have kids in there as a shield, right?
Well, my daughter that I saw Superman with, she said that one of her friends was babysitting for this group of kids, that they watch it every day. And so, it seems like the kids love it.
Wow.
So, yeah, I don't know what ages they are, but man, another sort of in the same category, but also a very different format and genre that I've been watching is Epic the Musical, which is this really interesting collaborative effort started by a young man when he was a theater student at the University of Notre Dame. I think it was for his senior thesis for his musical theater program. And he wanted to do a operatic musical theater version of the Odyssey. And so he wrote, I don't know how many songs in college, but he's written now 40 songs to cover the whole epic. And it's something like 2.5 hours long.
Wow.
He put each song out on TikTok as he made them. He auditioned people on social media to be the other voices. It was this really interesting community effort. And then they did a release party when it was all over in Ithaca, Greece. So that was pretty cool. There's talk of him trying to turn this into an animation. And in fact, there's fan art, these animatics for each of the scenes, and all these different people have contributed. And you can go on YouTube and you can see them all stitched together, even with kind of like the lyrical subtitles, so you know kind of who's singing. That's how I've been engaging with it. I think if I was just listening to it, I'd probably be a little bit lost, because it's been about 30 years since I've read the Odyssey. And okay, so spoiler alert, but at the same time, you've had 3,000 years. Odysseus is like the only survivor in this whole story, right? So he starts off with 600 men, and there's a whole song about that. And by the end, there's 599 people that have died.
Well, that sounds heavy.
Yeah. So it's a very heavy story, right? But the way that they made this was so fun. It's very much anime style. It's very light and hilarious at times. But man, are there some heavy moments, like when the Cyclops comes out and just smashes people, or when probably the hardest part is when Odysseus just lets Scylla just swallow up 6 of his men and doesn't really do anything. And then when Zeus kind of gives them the sort of the prisoner's dilemma of like, who are you going to sacrifice, to free yourself? And Man, there's some tough moments in it. And what's interesting is, well, we were having some offline discussion behind the scenes at Lorehaven, and I don't think he'll mind me saying this, but Josiah DeGraff was saying how he's kind of two minds about it. Because on one hand, he really likes how the musical brings out all these themes in a fun way. On the other hand, it's almost not dark enough because so throughout the musical, Odysseus is singing about his love for Penelope and how much he wants to get back to her. And Josiah's like, yeah, he wasn't exactly that loyal to Penelope, and so I've kind of mixed feelings about it. It doesn't quite tackle those themes, and he's just trying to get glory. He does a lot of things that prevent him from getting home, and so it takes him a while to realize that he's searching for glory in vain. And whereas in the musical, he's it's like he's always got that goal of getting home. Now, again, I think that was actually a good adaptation to the genre of anime and sort of the video game genre of like, I'm on this quest, from the very beginning, I know the quest that I'm on. But yeah, the original Odyssey has more of a chiastic structure to it. So it's a little different in that way, but this thing is really exploding among Gen Z. My daughters have been hearing about this in their musical theater group for a long time. They haven't watched it yet, but they're like, oh, if you mention this at all during one of our rehearsals, all the guys want to start talking about it. And sure enough, we were just with all these kids yesterday, and my daughters had just mentioned it to them, and they came up to me. They're like, oh, are you watching Epic the Musical? Oh, man. And they started singing it. And one of them had made his own like fan fiction music video of it. And he had props and everything. And I'm like, wow, like my kids weren't kidding. Like everyone is really into this. And it's sort of like the biggest musical no one has seen because it's only been online. And, you have to go on social media and find it. It's not something you can get from iTunes or Amazon. You have to know where to go. And yeah, they probably will bring it to a wider audience. And so it's so interesting how it's kind of flipped around how these things are usually distributed. But my point is, it's very, very light at times and very dark at times.
I love those stories that seem to come just out of nowhere that suddenly take over. And it does seem that the most popular stories with the most staying power have both that heavy emphasis and that light emphasis. I mentioned One Piece, for example. It started in the 90s. I mean, this one artist, Ichiro Oda, has been doing this for decades now. He's dedicated his entire life now to this franchise, which is so big that it now has a Netflix live action adaptation. And my wife and I are literally now assembling the Lego pirate ship from this once obscure manga anime that has now been going for decades, with over 1,000, maybe 1,200 episodes or chapters by now. And I think these stories have staying power. And that's why, for example, the Lord of the Rings counts, at least the films count as a story like this. The book's obviously much darker, and the films lighten them up a little bit and, added some playful banter here and there. But a lot of that is just drawing from the book itself. The original Star Wars films, certainly a mixture of light and heavy. And then a project that I have my eye on is a book adaptation that now the movie version is coming out early next year. And I think the book is like an exact hybrid between light and heavy. And that's Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. Science fiction novel. It's get the highest of possible high stakes for planet Earth and everyone on it. And yet the solution is basically through whimsy and science and more high stakes and daring space hijinks and a lot of speculative science. And now it's going to be a film starring Ryan Gosling, and it kind of marries that sense of whimsy along with like this Christopher Nolan like heavy space environment. And there's Gosling as Grace, the protagonist, saying at the beginning, like, I'm not an astronaut. I'm not an astronaut. And so it's got that goofy sense from the Lego movie directors, but then also they're showing these like huge sweeping epic space escapes and the entire planet is in jeopardy. And that's my flavor. I can't wait for Project Hail Mary. And I really hope that gives studios, along with stories like Dune that are kind of similar, that they got light moments, but they're also mostly heavy. I want more of these stories to live and thrive at the box office, as well as at publisher companies. I think that maybe books with these themes do better, but it seems right now that at least the zeitgeist is for the light stuff. But I really hope that Project Hail Mary and even K-pop Demon Hunters, they seem different, but I think they're both light and heavy at the same time. I hope that they will start to do better, especially as younger fans realize maybe they're introduced to these lighter stories like the Superman movie, and then maybe they go watch Richard Donner's Superman with its emphasis on verisimilitude, like a realistic world, even 1978 movie style. And then they go watch Man of Steel, which is even more grounded. And then maybe it's not they're growing up, they're just expanding a little bit. They're going from light to heavy, and they're realizing, oh, as I mature, I can handle these ideas. And not only that, but I find them just as fun, if not more so, than the lighter stories. I find it oddly enjoyable to explore this reality of plain ideas and complex ideas and light truths and heavier, challenging themes that may better match real life, which has those light moments, but also has those heavier moments. And particularly either one being a gift of Christ. Ultimately, he does say, please follow me. My yoke is easy. My burden is light. But then he says, take up your cross. So Christ is like saying that, yes, it is light. It is easy, but also it's going to be the hardest thing you've ever done to take up your cross and follow me. And so ultimately, I want a story that's going to show not a hero who's just like me with plain and simple realities and all shucks and all that. I want to see an aspirational hero, but a hero who comes in my direction to show me that, yes, it can be done. And then ultimately, I want an aspirational hero who's going to point me to Christ.
Yeah, there's a really good C.S. Lewis essay about this where he's kind of addressing this idea. Should we have children's stories with evil villains and dragons and so on? And he said there's kind of a mistake of trying to keep out of the child's mind the knowledge that he's born into a world of death, violence, wounds, adventure, heroism, and cowardice, good and evil. But we are actually born into a world like that. And so if you try to hide that from children, it's not going to be good for their development. And then he says, since it is so likely that they will meet cruel enemies, let them at least have heard of brave knights and heroic courage. Let there be wicked kings and beheadings, battles and dungeons, giants and dragons, and let villains be soundly killed at the end of the book. So really great essay there. And, I grew up with a couple of movies like this, like The Neverending Story. Man, there were some scary moments in that, but also some hilarious moments, some sad moments, but ultimately just a amazing victory by the end. And so I've always kind of had a taste for that. I think more recently something like Studio Ghibli movies like Spirited Away. But we want to talk about excellent Christian stories. So the Wingfeather Saga is definitely a good example.
That's
of
a good
this
one.
Light and heavy stories.
all at once. Yep.
My older girls have read all of the books many times. Our 11-year-old daughter is probably going to start reading the first book. And with all three of them, we've been watching the show. Now it's a little heavy for our 9-year-old son. So just, your mileage may vary, but you might want to know that, listener. But man, that show it's so hilarious at time. Like I've been listening to the book and all of the random footnotes that Andrew Peterson puts in there in the voice of Oscar N. Ratib, the bookstore owner, and just all the random facts about the world, the silly animals, all the songs that are in it. There's so many great light moments, and it's about kids. But man, there's some scary things in there for kids, and even for adults. It's like, I'm watching this as a father going, man, how would I keep my kids safe if we're crossing this bridge under a waterfall that's slippery and being pursued by trolls and, lizard men that are throwing spears at us? Like this would be pretty bad. And yeah, there's some bad moments that happen there. And so they don't, he's been a guest on the show and he's talked about this, saying that I don't want a world where like there's no danger, that there's no death, because that we are in a world with danger and death, but this is still a world where evil is defeated.
I want to see more stories like that, And if we're not going to see them from the big budget superhero movies or a world of corporations who decide that big dumb action is what people want right now, well, I guess we're going to have to get that from the Christian made stories. They may not have these multi-million dollars of budgets, but you know what? I'll bet they stand a much greater chance of breaking even when they make these stories. Because right now, the superhero movies, they're kind of performing some Hollywood accounting, like we talked about in our last episode. And they're not actually doing that well, y'all. It's kind of smoke and mirrors. So maybe the big profitable ones will come back. Maybe Spider-Man, amazing, or the Tom Holland Spider-Man 4. Maybe he's the one to save them. But for now, I think we can be not quite safe, but good in relying on some Christian-made novels, hopefully to capture both the lighter side of reality, but also the heavier side.
Well, to you, our listener, we want to know, during hard times, do you prefer light stories or heavier ones? Send us a note at podcast@lorehaven.com or find us on Facebook, X, or Instagram. And of course, we have our Discord server, the Lorehaven Guild, where we always have great discussions after each episode. So go find us there or send us a note.
Next on Fantastical Truth, over summer and school seasons alike, many Christian parents want books for their kids that don't have things like agenda or wokeness. But in our zeal to keep bad, poisonous content out of books, might we miss our children's more important need to enjoy good, nutritious content in those books? I'm looking forward to that topic because kids, like grown-ups, need both light subject in their stories, but also a slow and gradual introduction to heavier subjects. I think that's what God, as our Father, does for us. He will introduce us to these ideas, but slowly and patiently make it a little bit more complex, a little bit more challenging until we realize, oh, we can't keep the law. We are wretched. How in the world are we going to get out of this scrape? And then under these high stakes, God sends his son, Jesus Christ, to save us. Now the victory is even more meaningful. Let's look for those kinds of victories echoed in our favorite stories and keep seeking and finding Christ's fantastical truth.